The Odyssey the movie, as directed by Christopher Nolan, is not exactly like the original epic poem by Homer. You'll still see many of your favorite events in the movie, such as the Cyclops, the land of the giants, the cattle of Apollo, Circe and Calypso, Scylla and Charybdis. It's great that they were able to include all these details in the movie, but the message is very different. In the original, there's a lot more emphasis placed on traditional manhood as prowess in battle. These are heroes: Achilles, Odysseus, Agamemnon. They proved themselves in their strength for all time, basically. Here, in the modern take, there's more introspection. Odysseus has to face the mistakes he has made and give more penance. In both cases, Odysseus is a very proud man, maybe too much for his own good. In the original, he faces the sea and proclaims that it was not the gods, but his own cleverness that determined the war. Here, in the movie, we see that his men barely made it out of the cave from the Cyclops that was eating them, and they're about to go to their ships when Odysseus takes out another arrow and shoots it at the Cyclops. Then the Cyclops tears after them and takes a few more men before the rest can escape. So in both versions, Odysseus as a hero has work to do on himself. His ego is a little bit too much. But it's a lot more so the case in the movie, where he has to face his mistakes. The most important part of the movie was Zeus's law. It's if a stranger comes to your door, you're supposed to give them shelter and food and be good to them, because it could actually be Zeus in disguise. And if you're not good to them, what kind of a reaction would that incur? In the original, Odysseus was celebrated for coming up with the Trojan horse that wins the war in Troy. Here, it's criticized as a breach in Zeus's law, because it's a gift. When people give gifts, it's supposed to be in goodwill. It's a peace offering that should end the war. But it's actually a trick. There are all these warriors inside, and when the Trojans take the statue into their city and they go to sleep, the warriors come out and take them out in their sleep. It leads to the end of the Trojan civilization, basically. And it's all on Odysseus and his conscience for what happened to all those people. To an extent, we can excuse Odysseus for coming up with the idea of the Trojan horse to end the war in Troy, because it was not actually him that broke Zeus's law first. It was the Trojans visiting Menelaus' palace and taking away his wife Helen back to Troy with them. That's not the behavior of good guests. So they broke Zeus's law first. We can't say it was all on Odysseus. But to judge whether the Trojan horse was okay or not, we can look at the effects. First of all, in Greece, across these islands, one of which is Odysseus' own Ithaca, stories spread of these men coming from the sea and pillaging. There's no more Zeus's law, no more hospitality or trust between people. So it's quite terrible, in fact. But there's another event. Odysseus, he speaks, in his mind at least, to the goddess Athena. And there's a difference again with the original poem and an earlier version of the Odyssey film. Earlier, Odysseus had longer conversations and counsel with Athena. Here, he barely speaks to her. Someone speaks to him, he looks back, and she's gone. We can see Athena is almost like a figment of his imagination. And this is proved in a flashback later in the film, when he remembers, and it shows exactly what is the root of his guilt, that he remembers the battle once the gates of Troy were open and all these soldiers flooded in. Two of them precisely were dragging a girl, and Odysseus looked her right in the eyes, and it was the face of Athena. And you're wondering what happened. The girl is taken to the sword. This is the guilt that Odysseus is feeling, and it takes on the image of Athena in his mind to increase the importance of it. He feels terrible for what happened, and it cannot be good. This Trojan horse, it seems the movie is presenting quite a lot of irrefutable, almost, arguments against this sort of trickery. The focal point of the story happens in Ithaca, Odysseus' palace. After he went to the war in Troy, the land was left without a king, and eventually 108 suitors from noble families gathered in the palace, waiting for Queen Penelope, Odysseus' wife, to choose one of them as her husband. He could become the new king. All along, Penelope tells them, okay, let me finish making this tapestry, and when I'm done, I'll choose one of you for a husband. So that gives some time for Odysseus potentially to return, which is fair. In the meanwhile, they're eating all of the stores of food and wine and bringing Odysseus' family to ruin. So that's been for 20 years. They're like pigs. And I like how in the movie, there's a lot more sense of danger. Anytime Telemachus, as a young man, maybe he's about 17 toward the end, anytime he protests or seemingly steps out of line, their reaction of the suitors is very serious. They're just waiting for an excuse to take him out. All of this creates pressure on Penelope, and she doesn't seem to deal with it very well. When Telemachus goes up to her and asks her to assume the throne himself so he can solve this problem, she brushes him away. She says, "You're no Odysseus, how could you possibly deal with this?" Secondly, Antaeus, he's one of the most insolent suitors. He catches her playing the trick with the tapestry, and he tells her that she should marry him so he doesn't expose the secret. And Penelope reluctantly agrees, but partly she looked a little relieved that the whole drama would finally play itself out. Thirdly, when the people close to her ask her, "What do you want, Penelope, yourself?" she screams she just wants Odysseus back. He'll bring order to all this. But it doesn't seem like she really believes that it's possible. It's a very minor belief, if at all, that he could still be alive and making his way back home. And all of this casts her in a negative light. She's not very likable. But upon reflection, we can think that if one were in that same situation, that's exactly the response a person would have. So I thought this portrayal of Penelope was particularly realistic. There's a catch, and it happens around King Agamemnon. After the war in Troy, these ships of men all go in different directions to their own homelands. Odysseus goes one way, Agamemnon with his people go another way. Odysseus only meets him again later when he gets to the underworld, and there's the ghost of Agamemnon. It was expected that because Odysseus was roaming the seas for 10 more years, the rest of the people would safely get home. And Agamemnon did. But what happened there? Because before the war he had sacrificed his daughter for fair winds to travel to Troy, when he came back, his wife Clytemnestra took him out, and he arrived in the underworld as a ghost. And he warned Odysseus, "Be careful, when you return home, don't show yourself as king, because this is the fate that awaits." All those suitors waiting, their families had gotten powerful. In the years that Odysseus was gone, they would not have been happy for the king to come back. It could potentially have been Odysseus' fate too. But I think there's a loophole in this reasoning. Agamemnon was lost because of the sacrifice of his own child. That was the reason, not his people. His wife took revenge. Odysseus didn't have that sort of thing. Again, the suitors would not have been happy to see him, but this would be, again, no child Telemachus. There would be Telemachus and his father, the old king Odysseus. A lot more authority presented here. He may have been able to get away with a more diplomatic resolution. But I can commend the film for going along with the original storyline, not changing it too much. There is a confrontation between Odysseus and the 108 suitors. The other issue I have with it is that Telemachus is not shown in such a heroic light as in the original. He is left out of it. And this was the reasoning, the more modern take, that Odysseus could breach Zeus's law one last time, take care of the 108 suitors, clear his family's honor, and then he himself could go into exile. Would the noble families be able to accept Telemachus as the new king then? We could reason that he is not the old king. Odysseus, the one responsible, has gone. He's out of the picture. This is another person entirely. and they might not have been happy, but they could have agreed to his leadership. That's fine, but how is he portrayed then in the movie? Odysseus, this one man, goes against 108. And my feeling was, as a son, how could Telemachus resist? Even if his father tells him to stay out of it, how could he not stand shoulder to shoulder with his father against 108 men, such great odds? I found it unrealistic that Odysseus, with just a bow and a quiver of arrows, could face 108 men. I thought not even Achilles himself could have come out whole. And what happens? At least Telemachus was able to follow one of the suitors into the armory and fight with him there. So sort of off-screen from the rest of the people, the fray outside. So he's 1 against 1. And it's true, the suitor is a big burly man, but Telemachus also got to train, and the suitor the whole time is focused on feeding weapons to his comrades outside through a hole in the floor. That he's distracted the whole time, and Telemachus jumps on him, the suitor just brushes him off. In reality, I think the suitor would have turned, finished Telemachus in like 10 seconds, and then gone back to his task with the weapons. But okay, he's distracted, and finally Telemachus wins over him. That's the most heroism that Telemachus shows in the whole story here in the movie. Outside, Odysseus is fighting, unrealistically again, 108 suitors, and somehow he's able to win. And when he stands in the end, they show him he took a pierce in his neck, and there's an arrow sticking out from behind his lung. I don't think he would have survived that. Somehow he does. Next scene shows him he's getting on the ship with Penelope, and he has a bandage on his neck. They're waving to Telemachus, and Telemachus has a golden band around his forehead. He's the new king, and he just smiles sheepishly a little bit. I don't think he fooled anyone that he could be the new king. At that point, he just didn't make the case for it. I don't think he believed it himself in the story, if we can put ourselves so much into the story. And let's think about the noble families. They would not have been happy with him as the new king. But if we can imagine like a bar of involvement of Telemachus in the conflict, was his involvement 0 out of 100, let's say? No, it was more than that. Let's say we give him about a grade of 3 out of 100. It's still more than nothing. If you are a part of those families, would you believe that he knew nothing of what was happening and he took no part in it? Because that would be the story they would be telling. I think he was involved, more so than it is portrayed. I think he could have been involved a little bit more, sort of in support. He could have said, Odysseus, his father, was fighting the suitors for the family honor, and Telemachus, as the son, was protecting his father. I think that would have been a lot more realistic and reasonable, and it would have been more legitimacy for Telemachus as a man and a king of his land. I understand the difference between the two versions. In a movie like this that's trying to be as realistic as possible, the supernatural will be dampened. In the original, after Odysseus fights with the suitors, he and his few men are going to rush into conflict with the remaining noble families, and it's going to erupt into a larger war. But Athena, on account of the gods, intervenes and says there will be no more fighting, they will have peace, and they will learn to live together. In the movie, the responsibility is placed more on people. Odysseus goes into voluntary exile so there can be peace. If he's the reason, he's out, and the people can find a way to live together. And I commend the movie. I thought it was great. It's quite good that it is not an exact copy of the original, but gives its own artistic interpretation. And for the most part, all the arguments tend to make sense. Again, the part I didn't like was that Telemachus seemed to be snubbed of heroism, maybe even manhood. I thought, if we look at the bars of involvement again, he was supposed to be maybe involved, as I threw out that number 3 out of 100, but it could have been more because I think he was more wise into the plot, then the story would have been told, and the noble families would have known it. I suggested maybe his involvement could have been 10 out of 100, and I don't think it would have made a difference to the noble families. It was small involvement in both cases. Odysseus could have left, Telemachus may have found a way to live in peace with the noble families. Then the message would become, there is Zeus's law that people are trying hard and should be trying hard to observe. But it's not always on oneself. If everyone else is running rampant and one is just standing by and watching, kind of like Telemachus, that could be a mistake too. There is also family honor that needs to be protected. Maybe if family honor is preserved in the first place, then larger conflicts would not be so likely to break out. In this version, I think maybe the two stories, the original and the movie, their positions could have been consolidated a little bit more, and Telemachus could have been more of a hero and a king in his own right.